My name is Abraham, but before I was called Abram. And this is the story of the journey that changed not only my life, but the fate of entire nations. I lived in Ur of the Chaldeans, a prosperous city, full of temples and altars dedicated to stone and wooden gods. There I grew up, amidst the bustle of the markets and the teachings of my father Terach. But within me, there was always a yearning for something more, something that neither wealth nor prestige could fill. Then God spoke. It was neither an inert statue nor a human voice. It was a call, a command that resonated deep within my being. Leave your country, your relatives, and your father's house, to the land that I will show you. I will make you a great nation. I will bless you. I will make your name great. And through you, all the families of the earth will be blessed. What he was asking for wasn't easy. Leaving everything, my home, my safety, everything I knew, to follow a promise, a word, a voice. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew who was guiding me. So I took my wife Sarai, my nephew Lot, our servants and possessions, and we set out without looking back. We walked into the unknown, crossing rivers, deserts, and mountains. Every night I looked at the starry sky and repeated God's words to myself. I will make you a great nation. But how? Sarai and I didn't have children. After a long journey, we arrived in the land of Canaan. It was beautiful, vast, with hills and valleys full of life. There, God spoke to me again. I will give this land to your descendants. Descendancy, a word that struck my heart with both hope and doubt at the same time. But I didn't ask how or when. I simply believed. I built an altar in that place, in gratitude to God. It was the first sign that this territory, which now seemed foreign, would one day be the home of my children. Although at that moment, they did not yet exist. But the adventure was just beginning. And soon, my faith would be tested like never before. I obeyed the call of God. I left my home, my land, everything I knew, and I arrived in Canaan with the promise that my descendants would possess that land. But what I didn't expect was that the promised land would soon become a place of scarcity and despair. A famine struck the region. The fields withered, the flocks began to weaken, and hunger took hold of our people. Every day that passed, I saw how my people suffered, and doubt began to grow in my heart. Hadn't God brought us here? Why would he allow us to face this? Without a clear answer, I made the decision to go down to Egypt. Their lands were fertile, their kingdom prosperous, and there we could find food. But as we approached, a fear took hold of me. Sarai, my wife, she was beautiful, too beautiful, and I knew the reputation of the Egyptians. If a man had a desirable woman, they would kill him to take her. And if they kill me for her? And if everything I had built until now ended in Egypt, in the hands of a ruthless pharaoh? So I lied. I asked Sarai to say she was my sister, not my wife. It was an act of cowardice, of distrust, and I paid the price. Upon seeing her, the Egyptians praised her and quickly took her to the pharaoh's palace. In return, the king filled me with riches, sheep, cows, camels, servants. For a moment, it seemed like everything was going well, until God intervened. Plagues fell upon the house of the pharaoh. His kingdom was struck by calamities, and soon the monarch understood the truth. Sarai was not my sister, but my wife. Furious, he summoned me to his presence. I will never forget his look of anger and contempt. Why did you do this to me? Why didn't you say she was your wife? Take her and leave my land before something worse happens. Thus, humiliated but alive, I left Egypt with Sarai by my side. God had protected me despite my mistake. And although we returned to Canaan with riches and livestock, the most valuable thing I carried with me was a lesson. God had promised to make me a great nation, and I didn't need to lie or manipulate the situation to protect myself. Back in Canaan, I went to the place where I had built my first altar. There I fell to my knees and sought the face of God. I didn't want to depend on my cunning or my fear anymore, but only on him. But the trials were not over. A new conflict was looming, and this time, it wasn't a famine that would test my faith, but my relationship with my own nephew, Lot. We returned to Canaan with great wealth, but with it also came problems. The lands were no longer sufficient to support everyone. My nephew Lot's shepherds and mine began to argue. The water, the pastures, the space, everything became a cause for conflict. I couldn't allow ambition and discord to tear our family apart. We had embarked on this journey together, but now we had to take different paths. I called Lot, and I said, "Let there be no quarrel between us. If you go to the left, I will go to the right. If you choose the right, I will go to the left." Lot looked at the land and made his decision. His eyes rested on the valley of the Jordan, a fertile, green, and prosperous region. There were Sodom and Gomorrah, cities full of wealth, but also of corruption and wickedness. Without thinking twice, Lot chose those lands and headed towards Sodom. I, on the other hand, remained in Canaan, in the land that God had promised me. Shortly after, the war broke out. For powerful kings rose against the cities of the valley, and Sodom was plundered. Lot and his family were captured. They had taken everything, their possessions, their servants, even their freedom. When the news reached my ears, I knew I couldn't just stand by. Lot was my blood. It didn't matter that he had chosen Sodom. I had to bring him back. But how could I face kings with formidable armies? He didn't have thousands of soldiers, just 318 men. Faithful, brave, trained men, but few compared to the enemy armies. However, I did not stop. I knew that God was with me. We attacked at night, with cunning and precision. We divided our forces, caught the enemies by surprise, and defeated them. We recovered everything, Lot, his family, and his possessions. On the way back, something unexpected happened. An enigmatic man, a king and priest named Melchizedek, found us. He was dressed with majesty, and his words were like an echo of the Most High. He blessed me in the name of the Most High God, the creator of heaven and earth. And in that moment, I knew he was not just a simple king. He was a servant of the true God. In gratitude, I gave him the tithe of everything we had recovered. Then, the king of Sodom tried to offer me riches, but I refused. I didn't want anyone to say that they had made me rich, except God. I left with empty hands, but with something much more valuable, the certainty that God was my protector and provider. However, there was still an unanswered question in my heart. God had promised me a great nation, but I still had no offspring. And then, God decided to speak to me again. The victory over the kings was a great triumph, but inside me, something was still missing. God had promised to make me a great nation, but I had no offspring. The years went by, and Sarai and I remained childless. One night, while I was meditating on everything that had happened, God spoke again. "Do not be afraid, Abram. I am your shield, and your reward will be great." But I couldn't contain the anguish in my heart. "Lord, what good is all this to me if I still have no son? My heir will be my servant Eliezer of Damascus." Then God took me outside. "Look at the sky, Abram. Count the stars, if you can. Such will be your descendants." I looked up, and I saw the infinite. Thousands, millions of stars illuminated the night. At that moment, I believed. I believed against all logic, against all circumstance. And God counted it as righteousness. But God didn't stop there. He told me that we would make a covenant, a sacred confirmation of his promise. Following his instructions, I prepared the sacrifices, a calf, a goat, a ram, turtle doves, and pigeons. I split the animals in two and waited. The sun set, and a deep sleep fell upon me. Then, the presence of God descended. A dense darkness enveloped me, and a voice spoke. "Your descendants will be foreigners in a foreign land, and will serve there for 400 years. But afterward, I will deliver them and give them this land." Then, a torch of fire passed between the sacrifices. In that instant, the covenant was sealed. God would not break his promise. But time kept passing, and Sarai despaired. "The Lord has prevented me from having children," she said one day. "Take my servant Hagar and have a child with her." I hesitated, but I accepted. Hagar conceived a son and named him Ishmael. But what seemed like a solution only brought more problems. Sarai began to despise her, and Hagar, humiliated, fled to the desert. There, an angel of the Lord found her and said to her, "Return and submit to Sarai. Your son will be a strong man, and his descendants will be numerous." Thus was born Ishmael, my firstborn. But God still had greater plans, and his promise had not yet been fulfilled. And when I least expected it, God spoke to me again, but this time with a revelation that would change my life forever. The years went by, I kept waiting for the fulfillment of the promise. Ishmael grew strong, but deep down I knew he was not the son of the promise, the heir that God had promised. And then, God spoke to me again. I am the Almighty God. Live in my presence and be blameless. I fell prostrate on the ground. Every time God spoke, my soul trembled. But this time, his words were even deeper. I will make you the father of many nations. You will no longer be called Abram. Now your name will be Abraham. Abraham, a radical change. My name, which meant exalted father, would now be father of multitudes. But God didn't just change my name. He also changed Sarai's name. She will no longer be called Sarai, but Sarah, and from her will come nations and kings. I heard these words and laughed. I was 99 years old. How could I have a child at this age? And Sarah, she was 90. It was impossible, at least according to human logic. But God was clear. Next year, Sarah will give you a son, and you will call him Isaac. Shortly after, 3 visitors arrived at our camp. They were mysterious travelers, and when I saw them, I ran to greet them. I offered them water, food, a place to rest. And while they ate under the shade of the tent, one of them spoke. "Where is Sarah, your wife?" Her voice was different. There was power in her voice. "In a year, I will return to you, and Sarah will have a son." From inside the store, Sarah heard and laughed. It was not a laugh of joy, but of disbelief. Am I going to have this pleasure being so old? Then the voice rose again. Why did Sarah laugh? Is there anything impossible for the Lord? Sarah, frightened, tried to deny her laughter. But God knew. He knows everything. And at that moment, something changed. The laughter of disbelief would soon turn into laughter of joy, because God had spoken, and his promise was unbreakable. Isaac was on his way. But before the promise was fulfilled, God revealed something terrible to me. Sodom and Gomorrah were about to be destroyed, and Lot was in danger. The 3 visitors stood up after their announcement about the birth of Isaac and headed towards Sodom. I walked with them, unaware of what was about to be revealed. Then the Lord spoke. The outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is great, and their sin is very grave. I will go down to see if they have done according to that outcry. A shiver ran through my body. Sodom, the city that Lot had chosen. He knew that the wickedness there was great, but was it so great that God himself would come to judge it? The other 2 men went on their way, but I stood before the Lord. I couldn't remain silent. I couldn't ignore what this meant. I gathered my courage, and I interceded. Lord, will you destroy the righteous with the wicked? And if there are 50 righteous people in the city, will you not spare the place for the sake of them? God, listen to me. If I find 50 righteous people, I will spare the entire city for their sake. But I knew the reality of Sodom. I dared to continue. And what if there are 45? And if there are 40, 30, 20, 10? Every time he asked, God responded patiently. If I find 10 righteous people, I will not destroy it. But there weren't 10. That night, the 2 angels arrived in Sodom. Lot was at the city gate and welcomed them into his house. But the men of the city saw them and rose up in wickedness. They surrounded the house, demanding that Lot hand over the visitors so they could abuse them. Lot tried to reason with them, but the corruption of Sodom was complete. Then the angels intervened. They blinded the attackers and said to Lot, "Take your family and leave the city, because God is going to destroy it." But Lot hesitated. It was dawn when the angels urgently took him by the hand, along with his wife and daughters, and led them out of the city. Run for your lives. Don't look back or stop. And then the verdict was delivered. From the sky, fire and sulfur descended upon Sodom and Gomorrah. The roar was terrifying. The flames consumed everything. But along the way, Lot's wife disobeyed. She turned to look back, and she was turned into a pillar of salt. From above, I looked down at the valley and saw the smoke rising like the smoke from an oven. The cities that Lot had chosen for their beauty were now nothing but ashes. Lot and his daughters survived, but their story would end in tragedy. God had executed his judgment, and although it hurt me to lose my nephew on this path, I knew that the Lord was just. But in the midst of all this, Isaac's promise remained intact, and what I had waited for my entire life was about to come true. The days passed, the months went by, and then it happened. After so many years of waiting, of doubts, of repeated promises, Sarah got pregnant. At his age, no one would have believed it possible. But God had spoken, and at the appointed time, the son of the promise was born, Isaac. I remember the moment I held it for the first time. Sarah's laughter filled the store. God has given me laughter, and everyone who hears it will laugh with me. It was true. Isaac meant laughter, and every time we called him, we remembered that God makes the impossible possible. But the joy soon brought conflicts. Ishmael, my son with Hagar, was mocking Isaac. Sarah noticed it, and her face hardened. "Cast out this slave woman and her son," he demanded of me, "because the son of this slave woman will not share in the inheritance with my son, Isaac." My heart broke. Ishmael was my son too. I loved him. But God spoke to me. "Do what Sarah says. Do not fear, for from Isaac your descendants will come, but I will also make a nation of Ishmael." With a heavy heart, I gave provisions to Hagar and Ishmael and sent them into the desert. I watched them walk away until they disappeared on the horizon. I didn't know what would become of them, but God did not abandon them. When Ishmael was about to die of thirst, an angel guided them to a well of water. God fulfilled his promise to him as well. And so, the years went by. Isaac grew up strong and full of life. He was the promise, the future, the reason why he had left everything. And then, God did the unthinkable. "Abraham," he called me. "Here I am," I replied. "Take your son, your only son, whom you love, Isaac, and take him to Mount Moriah. There, offer it as a burnt offering." My heart stopped. Isaac, the promised son, the one that God himself had given me. I couldn't understand it, but I knew God, and I trusted him. So at dawn, I took Isaac, 2 servants, and the wood for the sacrifice, and we set out. We walked for 3 days. Upon reaching the mountain, I saw the place in the distance. I turned to my servants. "Wait here. The boy and I will go worship, and we will return." Isaac carried the firewood on his shoulders as we climbed. I carried the fire and the knife. The silence was broken when Isaac asked, "Father, we have the wood and the fire, but where is the lamb for the burnt offering?" My voice barely came out. "God will provide, my son." We reached the summit. I built the altar and placed the firewood. I looked at Isaac. He didn't resist when I tied him up and placed him on the altar. He was my son. It was my promise, and I was about to turn it in. I took the knife. I raised my hand, and in that instant, "Abraham, Abraham." The voice of the Lord's angel stopped my hand. "Do not lay a hand on the boy. Now I know that you fear God, because you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me." So I looked to the side. Among the bushes, a ram caught by its horns. God had provided. I took the ram and offered it instead of my son. I called that place Jehovah Jireh, because on the mountain of the Lord, he provides. When we descended from the mountain, I knew that God had tested my faith like never before. And for my obedience, God renewed his promise. "I will multiply your descendants like the stars of the sky and the sand of the sea. And in your seed, all the nations of the earth shall be blessed." God had never failed, but my journey was coming to an end. Only one last stage remained in my story. The years, like footprints in the sand, continued their course. Abraham's life was full of moments of faith, sacrifice, and fulfilled promises. But now, the final stage of my life was approaching. First, Sarah passed away. Sadness invaded my heart. She had been my companion throughout my life, the mother of Isaac, the woman who believed in the promise that God made to me. Her departure left a deep void in me, but I knew I had to honor her memory. I bought the cave of Machpelah and Hebron as a burial place. This land, which the Lord had given me, became the first real possession that my descendants would have in the promised land. There Sarah rested, and shortly after, I would also find myself in that same place. My son Isaac, now an adult, also had a mission to fulfill. But who would be his wife? I knew that Isaac should marry someone from our family, a woman who shared our faith, who understood God's calling upon our family. So I entrusted my most faithful servant to travel to my homeland to find him a wife. The journey was long, but God was with the servant, guiding every step. At the water well in the city of Nahor, the servant prayed to God, asking for a sign. "Let the young woman who offers water for me and my camels be the one chosen for Isaac." And so it happened. Rebekah, a young woman of good heart, came to the well. She not only gave water to my servant, but also to his camels, showing her generosity and kindness. The servant understood that God had answered his prayer. He asked Rebekah to return with him, and she agreed. When they arrived at Abraham's house, Isaac took her as his wife, and they both loved each other deeply. My family, the promise of a nation, continued to grow. The years kept passing, and one day, when I was already 175 years old, I felt that my time had come. I called Isaac, Ishmael, and all my children. I blessed Isaac, and then I went to rest with my parents in the cave of Machpelah. My life was a journey of faith. I didn't always understand everything that was happening. I didn't always see the path clearly. But what I always had was the promise of God, a promise that was fulfilled in an incredible way. For my descendants, Isaac, the son of the promise, gave rise to the nation of Israel. God fulfilled what he had said, that in me, in my seed, all the nations of the earth would be blessed. And although my body no longer walked on the earth, my legacy lived on through my descendants, and God's eternal promise continued. Because God is faithful, and what he promises, he fulfills.